This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the November 18th edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, back with you in the Brooklyn bunker, joined by Muggs the Labrador. If she has any tips, I'm sure she'll bark at appropriate points during the show to let us know she seconds that emotion. I'm joined today by the usual crew we have from the DRF offices in New York, a more secure location than usual, actually, in those DRF offices, Mike Hogan.
Hello, Pete.
And we also have from an undisclosed location. Are you up in the jet again today? You up in the jet, or are you somewhere around Texas?
Jet, circling in the jet.
That voice.
We'll see where it lands.
That voice you hear, of course, last year's NHC Tour champion, Jonathon Kinchen. JK, what's up?
Oh, yeah, no, nothing much. I am circling around. We'll see where this bad baby lands, and we'll go from there.
We have 4 different tracks. We don't often do this. The races we're going to be talking about later today on this show, 4 different tracks. So that's 4 opportunities for places to go, whether it's Aqueduct, Laurel, Delta Downs, Del Mar. I'd make Del Mar the favorite there, knowing you as I do, JK.
Well, just because of the weather, and it'll be an opportunity for me to watch another future bet horse air on the field.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. hold your horses, literally, and we'll talk about your ridiculous future bets and just how good you're looking when we get to that race in the second half of the show. There was a Del Mar story I forgot to tell. I haven't told you this even either of you guys this off air even, but I felt like it should be. I felt like it should be told. You know, it's good in my role with the DRF. I've become friendly with this group of contest players around the country, and it's a good thing. One of them was looking out for me the other day. We were all sitting at Del Mar on the veranda, and I went to make a bet. Now, it was just my wife wasn't there at the time. It was me and my 3-year-old daughter, Perrin. And you might say, well, why didn't you just make a bet on your phone? And I'll admit, most of the time I do just bet on the phone. But this concept, and it's something I'm going to take a break in the story to let you explain it, JK. This idea that when we go to racetracks, particularly racetracks that show us great hospitality, it's nice to support the room. Why don't you, JK, talk about what you mean when you talk about supporting the room when you go to a track?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best example of that would be the Eddie Logan, right? When you're in the Eddie Logan, TQ and Nate Newby, they treat you very well. Your food is paid for, your drinks are paid for. Orcadia does not even allow you to get to the ice of your adult beverage. And so when I'm there, I bet through the window. I won't bet through my ADW or the ADW that I don't have. I mean, through my friend's ADW. I don't bet. So it's just a way to, the on-track dollar is the golden dollar. And the reason that rooms like the Eddie Logan Suite and the Green Room at Keeneland exist is because Jim Goodman, Nate Newby, Tom Quigley could go to management and say, look, I have big players in here that are betting, and we're making about 10% after we split with the horsemen and all that stuff. So it makes sense for us to do this. So when we're there, we try to do it in the room rather than on the computer.
Right. And this, for folks, for newer players, I think it's helpful. I mean, maybe some folks aren't that interested in the business side of things. I know my first 5 years as a racing fan, when I'd see one of the business type articles on the form, on the DRF website, I'd glaze over a little bit. But it's important to understand these underpinnings. Very early on in the days of simulcasting, when tracks viewed this new money coming in from other places basically as found money, they didn't really know how to value it. And it set forth this business cycle where that money is sent, the money that gets bet not at the track, frankly, the tracks just don't get enough money, don't get enough of a cut of that money in the overall picture. So it created this weird dynamic that Jonathon's talking about. And like him, I was in a nice, it wasn't by no means the Eddie Logan Suite or the Green Room, but sitting on the veranda and decided I would, support the local track. Now, the problem is some of the bets I make are pretty complicated in terms of the amounts. I was betting a double where I wanted to try to essentially what we call Dutch. People have asked what that means. Good chance to talk about that too. Dutch bet is a bet where you vary the amounts of the bet so you win the same amount no matter which outcome occurs. Easiest example would be in the win pool. Say there's an even money shot and a 3-1 shot. You're going to bet more on the even money shot to balance it out so you win the same whether you're 3-1 or your even money wins. So anyway, what I get stuck on a line. I had my daughter, parent, she was doing great. She was sort of like looking at a book and being by herself. And I said, Dad, will be back in just a minute. I go to the line. I finally get up to the machine. I'm punching in all these combinations, and my phone rings. I look down. I see the name Duke Matisse, one of the players I've been fortunate enough to become friends with over my course of covering contests for the phone. He's like, yeah, Pete, your daughter's asking for you. I end up quickly punching back, finishing up at the window. I will admit I did finish punching in the bets and running back to the table. She was fine. It was just, she had that moment of, she had that where's my daddy moment at sort of the inopportune time. So there you go. There's my submission for Father of the Year.
I like it.
I don't know,
I'm
JK.
sure I've got a few. I'm sure, Jonathan, you've got a few too.
Yeah, I've got some of those moments, but I probably shouldn't put them on record, considering some. I should. If you see me, ask me. I'll tell you. I'll tell you personally some funny stories about stuff like that.
I wasn't going to ask. I just wanted to volunteer mine and send that little bit out in the world. She had a great time. I think I told the story in the last show of her crying as we passed Del Mar on the way to the airport, as we passed the track itself, crying because we couldn't go to Del Mar that day. We'll be back. We'll be back soon. I don't know if I'll be able to get back there during the meet, but I'm sort of toying with the idea of trying to revive the old tradition I had of always going to Del Mar for 1 week or the other, whether it goes beyond Saratoga. I guess these days Del Mar pretty much ends Labor Day now, Jonathan, is that right?
I'm bad with dates.
Gotcha. I think they do.
Yeah.
In the old days, they would sometimes go a little bit past, or at least to the Wednesday. But I think I got to get that place back on my annual calendar. It's so fun with kids particularly, and parents' affinity for it, and my own affinity for it. It's going to get back there. But all right, we'll be talking about Del Mar in a little bit. And yes, that was why I mentioned it. I figured between the weather and your expertise on SoCal racing and your little bit of a financial interest in mastery, that would be the most likely destination for the plane today. We got a couple of questions in about the Breeders' Cup. I wanted to get to those before we dive into the races today. I also wanted to see if either of you guys had any outstanding business. Obviously, we covered a lot of ground, didn't even get a chance to talk about all the Breeders' Cup races on Tuesday's show. So, Mike, I'll ask you, was there any unfinished business you wanted to chat about before we get to some listener questions?
Nothing that probably won't come up organically over the next month or two as we get towards the end of the year and the calendar turns to 2017 and we start talking about the eclipse. But let's jump to the questions. We can save all of that stuff for later.
That good with you, Jonathan? Did you have anything else you wanted to chew on specifically from Breeders' Cup before we get to these listener questions?
Not that I can think of. I'm sure something will come up, but no, not off the top of my head.
All right. Well, Drew Coatney had a couple of really good ones. The first question was, is there any horse, and I think when answering this, we should take into account that we've had, several retirements since the BC, but was there any horse in particular we're looking to bet back that we saw run over the course of the 2 days of the Breeders' Cup? Jonathan, we'll start with you.
Yeah, what's funny is there is actually a horse that I would be interested in moving forward. And it was a horse that I was completely against on the day, and that's Practical Joke. We talked about it. I didn't scream at the top of my lungs because I felt like we had some information that I didn't want to scream at the top of my lungs, but the inside was very, 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 very good when Syndergaard and Practical Joke ran 1-2 in the Champagne. And my biggest angle in that race was that I was against those two horses, and Practical Joke ran pretty well off of that. And so when a horse kind of outperforms my expectations, it's one that I'll look for moving forward because it feels like wherever he shows up again, he doesn't have to necessarily be the favorite. So he's a horse that I'd be interested in betting moving forward. A horse that I'd be interested in watching run, but not so much of a betting opportunity because I think the world saw him. But I'm looking forward to betting Ohm or singling Ohm a few times down the hill next year at Santa Anita.
That makes a lot of sense. Mike Hogan, how about you? Any horses in particular you're looking to bet back from the 2 days of the Breeders' Cup?
I think we talked about it a little bit on Tuesday. That juvenile fillies race was so slow, it's hard to really make a case for betting too many back. But I do think Yellow Agate really had no chance to run. I still don't know how good she is the only concern. And I think everybody is going to see what I saw. So she may be another Mo Tom and one of those universal bad trip horses. So I'm not saying I'm looking to bet her back so much as I think she's better than what we saw. I still don't know what that means. From that race, though, I think the best horse is actually probably American Gal, who broke from the outside post, completely blew the turn, ran really well. I think ran the best race in there. Again, she's another Baffert horse. She's probably going to get overbet. I don't know if I'm looking to bet her back because she'll probably be a short price wherever she lands. I just think she's the best one we saw in that race.
Yeah, no, Mike, to your point, she and I'm glad you mentioned that because I actually noticed that kind of blasting back through some of the results through this week. She ran phenomenally off of that short rest, stretching out, the whole, she ran big. Yeah. She's a serious racehorse. And in a group that no one's jumped up and grabbed us yet, that's one filly that when she comes back, she'd be one that I'd be really interested in singling.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a lot of enthusiasm there. I was sort of taking the there are no trips in slow races attitude about all of those fillies and looking for who comes to the division since. But, especially if circumstances change. American Gal, how far do you think Jonathon she ultimately wants to run?
Oh, I think she ran 1.25 miles in the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, for sure.
It's kind of the same idea as Nyquist in last year's juvenile, where people kept asking, well, can you get 1.25 miles? Well, hell, he got 1.25 miles at Keeneland when he was 7 wide on both turns. And she got blown up at the beginning of the race and ran on. I think she's a really, really nice horse. And Baffert, the idea that he felt confident enough to wheel her back in that scenario says what he thinks about her talent-wise. I thought she would run poorly with the scenario that she was given. And the fact that she ran as well as she did, even after having such a discouraging trip, it says a lot about how good she really is.
That's a good point about Baffert's training, too, the confidence he showed. We talked about it in one of the webinars we did, that for a trainer to do something so unusual did speak of a certain confidence. So maybe that's one who, despite the trip is bad enough that you don't even have to look at the pace figures or the final time figure in making an assessment going forward. Yellow Agate for me, we'll see who she shows up against. Obviously facing that same group, you'd have more confidence than against the new shooters who will inevitably come up next year. But
I think we can get an okay number on her though. She was 5-6 to 1 that day. She, and I think, obviously she was facing a much different field than she'll be facing next time. But she kind of did no running there, even though there was trouble. It'd be different if she kind of finished up after the trouble, but she didn't. Manny kind of wrapped up on her. We talked about that last week, and that little son of a gun. But, I think you could still get an okay, fair number on her. She'd be a 2 to 1 favorite in the next spot she shows up in.
All right, well, we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll return to some of these races. What about Good Samaritan as a horse to look for going forward? Jonathon, have you spent any time with the tape? I thought watching it live that he caused his own trouble. I've heard other people say that the trouble was caused for him. What do you think of that, first of all, and how much does it matter to you?
Man, that's an awesome point, Pete. I love the idea that you just brought up, and that is that, I don't care if he caused his own trouble. He's a 2-year-old in a 14-horse field drawn outside on his 3rd career start. He's probably still a little bit green. And so once he figures things out with the run he made after the trip he got, that's another serious racehorse.
Yeah, he's on my list for sure. I mean, probably not going to be the biggest price wherever he turns up, but just a horse to follow for next year. Another horse to follow for next year for me. It's an unusually strong group in the Breeders' Cup Turf, and the horse that I had talked about at some length in there, Ulysses, I thought ran pretty well, all things considered. I don't know what the plans are for Ulysses, but he seemed like a horse to me that seemed suited to American racing and might be interesting in a race like the Arlington Million should connections choose to go that way, where you don't have the ARC 1-2 and a horse like Flincher in there. Could look pretty good with some form that maybe will mean you could still get kind of a square price on him. He was another that I thought about throwing out as a bet back. Any others before we move to this next question I have?
I mean, I think that in every race you can identify a horse that I completely forgot about Good Samaritan. I tell you what, if Forever Unbridled, I don't know if she's been sold or if she's been retired, but if she runs back next year, she's a serious racehorse too. It seems like they had some trouble keeping her together with all the breaks and stuff.
Yes.
But from every pace perspective that I've looked at, and this is not to discount what Beholder and Songbird did, but the pace was moderate at best, if it wasn't a little bit slow for those types of horses. And she came from off of it and ran huge and looked for a minute like she was going to run by both of them.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and you could see her getting a setup. Of course, she's going to have to contend with some in this same division with some of these pretty serious runners. But yeah, I agree. The way she was handled with kid gloves, sort of like an Ouchie Unbridled Song, does suggest that maybe she's done enough with that nice Grade 1 placing. But I definitely take your point there, J.K. Any others to throw out there from either of you guys thinking through these races? I feel like this is a fertile topic for listeners to give an idea of some of the horses we're looking at for next year and beyond.
I don't have any others, but I'll make 2 points about two horses that we've already mentioned. American Gal, according to Trackus, went 48 feet further than Champagne Room and 72 feet further than the second place finisher Valadorna. So,
and just so you guys know, it's about, I've heard about 7 feet as a length. That's
I use 10, JK. I use 10, which
10?
comes from the sort of Brohammer Sarton model. But I'm sure there are people with a deeper understanding of physics who could explain the 7-8 number. But in any case, you're talking about real distance here, at least 5 lengths, maybe more.
Yeah,
on a racetrack that we consider we said is fair. I mean, that situation is much more significant if the inside is good, and it's a lot less significant if the inside is bad. That's a little bit advanced, but on a fair track, it's a real number that has to be considered.
Yeah, and again, Jonathan's point, I think, shouldn't be understated. This is a horse trying 2 turns for the first time off of a short layoff that had some issues prior. I think she's going to be a major player in the division. And of the fillies that ran well or had a chance to run in that race, she's the one I want out of it. And then one other thing I'll say about Good Samaritan, I'm really curious where he finally ends up for next year. I know the connections were thinking very strongly about running him in the juvenile instead of the juvenile turf. They actually listed that as the first preference, but then cooler heads prevailed, and they decided they didn't want to try him on dirt for the first time in the Breeders' Cup. But they have said that they really want to try him on dirt next year as a 3-year-old. I wonder if they're going to try and go down the Triple Crown Trail. They obviously have Windstar has huge plans in mind for him. They want to make him a stallion. The way you really make a stallion in North America is success on the dirt. And so I don't know how soon, but I know at some point they're going to try it. And if he takes to it, he could very well be a Triple Crown contender.
An interesting point, and I do agree that that's the likely path for him at some stage. And maybe that's where the price comes from in there as well.
Could be.
JK, any other? You want to throw out one more before we move on? It sounded like you had a bag full when you started thinking about it for a second.
No, this is a really fun game. This is a great question. I tell you who I wish was running. I wish Ironicus was running because he'd be so overbet again.
Leave poor Ironicus alone.
I do think that, look, this is a chalky situation, but I do think that any person who felt like Tepin was over the top or lost a step, I would hope that her performance would give you the courage to lean on her moving forward and the intelligence to not try to beat her.
I wouldn't mind a little break. I'll tell you what. I mean, it's been such a long year, and the talk of going to Asia and then coming back right away. I mean, it's just obviously the Cassies know way more than me about training horses, but just like as a bettor in terms of the confidence. Look, I don't oppose Tepin. I stopped that unprofitable game after the Breeders' Cup last year, and it served me pretty well throughout the year. So I'm not saying I'm going to oppose her. I'm just saying, like, if she were to be given a break and come back maybe not in January, but a little bit later and have a campaign pitched with maybe a fewer stops on it early in the year, I'd just bet with that much more confidence. That's all I'm saying.
It's fair point.
I mean, do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm being a wimp here, and it's just like, hey, she's gonna just continue to be the machine? What's your attitude about her going forward, JK?
Look, I think it just depends on what spots they pick. When she's cranked for big spots, Asia, I've heard even maybe thoughts of Dubai or what. I mean, if she's going to if for big spots, she'll run huge. For grade 3s, grade 2s, and prep races that are not significant to the team and to Mr. Masterson, they're going to be treated as prep races where, she's not necessarily going to be fully cranked. And I think we saw that this year. There's a couple of times she wasn't cranked. The Woodbine Mile looks like she lost a step. I'm doing the quote fingers, and and she wasn't cranked for that spot.
Well, and there is the point that she's such a unique. We've had Norm talk about on the show. She's a tricky filly to train in the sense that she's so smart. She doesn't really like just training to train. They can get her going sometimes by working in company, but the idea of maybe for her, because of her unique qualities, the races are performing more of a training role than they would with the average grade 1 horse. But anyway, it's an interesting thing to think about. What's your idea, Mike, going forward with Tepin? I mean, whether we're talking Asia or Dubai, or I mean, do you anticipate keeping her on side going forward, or is she one you feel like you might be looking to oppose down the line?
Look, you know me. I'm much more on the side of if there's any chance that I can oppose a short price favorite, I'm going to look long and hard at doing so. So I'm kind of with you, Pete. But look, this is Tepin we're talking about too, so I'm not going to jump in too deeply trying to beat her unless I see something that makes me feel a lot more confident about it.
Well, we'll keep, obviously, tabs on that story as well. Going to move on to this other question we have from Drew. He was just talking about the meet as a whole and asked what if there were any particular angles that we use year in, year out at the Breeders' Cup, or I guess in handicapping in general, that happen to apply over Breeders' Cup weekend. He mentioned, Jonathan, your idea about the types of horses who succeed down the hill. I'll let you talk about that. One that just popped in my head when this question was asked is something I said right after AP Indian's performance in the sprint, which is, I think, in future Breeders' Cups in California, I'm going to take a dim view of the Eastern Invaders. I'm not sure if that's fair or not, but it just seems like we've seen enough of the East Coast sprinters underperform when we get out there that I'm going to count it against them a little bit. Not saying I'm going to toss everyone, but if I was going to bet, 3X, maybe that gets down to X when it comes to the East Coast sprinters in California in the Breeders' Cup going forward. So, JK, feel free to talk about the downhill angle that proved successful again, or take this question in any direction you wish.
Yeah, I mean, I think the downhill angle is definitely one that's a big one, one that needs to be respected, and I think that the order of finish kind of proved that with Ohm cutting back, obviously cutting back. I don't even remember who ran third. I didn't bet the try.
The rail horse with the
Pure Sensation on the stretch.
Yes,
yeah. Yep. He ran huge from down.
He did ran, but never threatened. He was a good third, but it was never going to win.
But he held off a bunch of other cutback horses that I thought were going to run better. When you get a chance, back to the earlier question, this just reminded me. Watch Green Mask's trip. I've joked and called him the Green Chandelier because he's been nominated for the Hanger of the Year award, but he ran big that day with a really bad trip. The other angle that I think I've picked up on, and I haven't perfected it yet, but I'm working on it. The idea is, but essentially it's kind of Lamato is a good example of it. Toronado he was another horse that I think is a good example of it. But these horses, these European horses that run in our turf mile here, that that are kind of the quicken types that are in these kind of slowly contested mile races in Europe, and then have that really big turn of foot to finish. And I think those horses struggle here because the pace that we go in that race, I think it dulls their kick a little bit, and it gets them off the bridle earlier because they're having to run a lot faster earlier, whether they're in seventh or they're in fourth. They're being sucked along at a faster clip than I feel like they feel comfortable with. So I'm going to do a better job evaluating that type of horse. I thought Alice Springs was going to be the galloping type that will just kind of stay on and can kind of stay at one pace. I'm not saying that that's not the type of horse I'm looking for, but unfortunately, she didn't run very well to help me out with this thesis.
Well, the mile has not been much of a playground for the English, Irish, European runners over the last couple of Breeders' Cups. You go back to Golda Kova's dominance, but I mean, she was such a freak. She could do it all. Not unlike Tepin. Good runs on the straight mile at Ascot, and also could handle the turns and quicken. It no doubt that those were two of the big disappointments of the Breeders' Cup, and you may be on to a reason as to why. I definitely think it's smart when we talk about the mile next year to maybe even be more critical of the invaders and whether or not they're suited to the task. Mike, how about you? Any other successful angles from Breeders' Cup Day that you want to mention to Drew and other listeners?
Well, I don't know if you guys read it, but I wrote a Bet This Not That about using trainer stats and other angles for the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, of course. That was a great piece. And you just tweeted a free version of it if folks want to check that out. Did you send that from at DRF Hogan or at DRF Formulator?
At DRF Hogan. I think I retweeted it from Formulator. But yeah, I mean, what I do and I approach looking for things like value and value trends. And, these are the best horses, in some cases in the world, but certainly the best horses in North America. And the best horse is probably not that much better than the fifth best or the eighth best in most cases. But the market will value them completely differently, which is why you often will get very, very nice prices on horses that are seeming contenders, Tourist, for instance, or Finest City. These are horses that aren't necessarily that much slower on figures or on other ways of rating, but the market overvalues them in comparison or undervalues them in comparison to some others. So that's how I look at it. That's the approach I took in the article. So I absolutely do that. One other thing I'll mention about Down the Hill, and I mentioned it in the article, is I also look for jockeys who are familiar with that hill and have had success on that hill, because riding that down the hill at Santa Anita is completely different from riding pretty much anywhere else in the world. And there has never been a Breeders' Cup turf sprint run at Santa Anita that has been won by a jockey who hasn't already won there. So any of the Europeans, the East Coasters, they don't win, or they haven't yet. And of course, as Jonathon mentioned, the Exacta was rounded out this year by a couple of Southern California jockeys on Southern California horses. So
seems logical to me. It is such an unusual configuration. They call it European style, but it's not like it's a replica of what goes down in Europe. It's just the uncommon configuration makes it a sensible analog to the UK, where you have downhills and turns of different directions.
Moving forward. Go ahead.
I was just say, don't they run uphill more there? And the downhill parts in Europe are not nearly as steep as that downhill here, right?
No, yeah, that's unique. I mean, there are Newmarket has the famous dip, and there's other instances of running downhill at various courses around France and the UK and Ireland. But yeah, no, it's pretty much its own deal, and it makes sense that people with more experience are gonna do a little bit better on it. Of course, you also have to have the horse. What were you going to say, Jonathon?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, just moving forward, I know we're about 350 days away from it, but next year at Del Mar, that turf course is going to be very tricky for a couple of reasons. One, we're back to a 5.5 sprint, which is gonna kind of cater to a different type of horse. Kind of brings the Keeneland 5.5 horses, the Belmont horses, the Parks horses, kind of brings them back into the mix a little bit. And the other situation is what I've noticed really following Del Mar the last 2 years is their turf courses is very unique in its configuration, and I've still been trying to figure out how certain horses do better there, but it's kind of more of a paperclip. The turns are really tight there, and I think it's hard to make up ground on the turns.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to make up ground on the backside and or in the stretch, and so that kind of fits a certain type of horse. So just something to keep in mind when as you're watching turf races for the next 340 days, getting ready for Breeders' Cup 2017.
It's a good point. Also, that interior chute makes a difference. We'll be talking about the interior chute when we get to the Artie Schiller at Aqueduct here in a minute. But you have this unbanked extra half a little turn, and that's got to affect ground loss and a bunch of other things. And the same thing Jonathon was saying is certain horses are going to be in a better position to deal with that than others. And it's something handicappers need to be aware of. Before we dive into the races, I just want to do a couple of minutes on tournaments. We have a new leader on the NHC Tour. I'm going to be writing a piece. I should have written it before we went on the air today, but I got busy handicapping these races and couldn't stop. I'm going to do a little update. Rick Broth, the new leader. Do you know anything about him, JK? Have your paths crossed at all?
I feel really bad. I believe we've met before. And I'm looking up his picture right now. I think I know who he is. I'm trying to remember if it's the right guy.
He won Keeneland when we were there in the spring, made a big play on Kasaki.
The guy that bet. Yes, I remember. I know who you're talking about. I do know Rick.
And he just did very well. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, you can relate to this, Jonathon, more than anybody else, but was in a position where he was playing in online over the weekend at another contest site, and really only the win was going to get him the points that would really, I don't know if I want to say that would make it worth playing, but only a win in this online was going to get him to first in the contest. It's just, tell us, Jonathon, about how stressful that is when you've been grinding on the tour the whole year and you're in this position where, if you run fourth, it's fine, but you're really only in it to win. How does that change the way that you play in a contest environment?
I mean, you're gonna laugh because I think you're gonna. Once I answer this question, you're gonna be like, I should have known the answer to that. It's actually not stressful, because the stressful part is trying to figure out what you got to do to get fourth. When all you got to do is win, then you can just kind of grab them, like I say all the time, and just try to win the contest. And it's really less stressful than trying to figure out, I need to get 7 so I can get an NHC spot. I wonder what the 6th guy's going to do. Do you think he's going to play? Well, what's his background? Oh, he's a rich guy that doesn't care. Okay, well, maybe he won't swing. And it's like, but if you just got to win, then you just go win.
That makes sense.
So it's a lot less stressful.
That makes sense. And that, to me, I think fits your gambling personality, too, as a guy who has strong opinions. And if you can just bet, you're happy if you can just bet the horse you like, whereas figuring out the machinations of game theory and things that might potentially take you off the horse you like because a shorter priced horse could maybe get you what you need. I could see that stressing you out particularly. Do you think that's a piece of it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I that's the worst. The worst situation in tournaments is what I call drawing. Well, there's a drawing dead, and then there's a mythical drawing dead. Drawing dead means you literally have no mathematical chance. The mythical drawing dead is where it's like, I know that the 3-1 or the 4-1 are going to win, but they don't help me, so I have to take the hopeless 7-1 shot, and I'm just going to go ahead and go to the bar now because I know that horse can't win. So that's the worst. That's the worst.
Also want to give a shout out to our friends at Public Handicapper. I was very happy to see this year the top 2 finishers in the PH Challenge, the 6-month contest that we do the races pretty much every week here on the podcast. They provide them for us, and they're part of that PH Challenge. Top 2 finishers were both registered for the NHC Tour, so they get to go to the big dance in Vegas. And there's some interesting similarities and an interesting contrast between the two men. Greg Nepper, the overall winner. Bill Cook ran second. Nepper is a contest regular. Jonathon, you pull up his picture. I know you'll have seen him if you don't already know him personally. He's been playing on Public Handicapper for something like 10 years, long-time player on there, and also been a regular at the NHC. Bill Cook's story, very interesting. He goes back to the early days of PH. PH, and I'm going to write a whole article about this because Scott Carson gave me some amazing stuff I couldn't fit into the piece, basically about starting it as a college student in the 1990s as something he'd fax around to friends. But it started officially in 1999, same year as the NHC. It's a venerable contest. But yeah, so Cook started maybe 2001, we were guessing, just from the number of races he's played. It's an incredible amount of races he's played on PH over the years. But here's the thing about Cook. Only recently did he decide to join the NHC Tour, and it's a good thing he did because he got his name up there into second place. I have an article on DRF.com right now if folks want to read a little bit more about this year's PH Challenge. And let me say, I have, not that I didn't before, but just all the more respect for PH and Scott and the PH editors. What a good job they do of picking the races week in and week out without having them. There's no PH contest this week. Very soon, either next week or the week after, their winter contest will start. We'll be talking about that. Maybe we'll even have Chris Larmy and or Scott Carson on the show to talk about that a little bit. But because there's no PH contest this week, I had to pick the races, and it's a hard thing to do. I just decided to keep it super simple. I went with what I perceived as the four biggest races of the weekend, one of which probably won't, as Mike Hogan pointed out to me in an email, take very long to talk about, but there you have it. Let's move on right to those. Let's start with one of the really interesting races this weekend. It's the 8th at Aqueduct, the Artie Schiller. Mike Hogan will give you first honors in discussing this one. What did you come up with?
This is like you said, Pete. This is a good race, and this is it's a listed stakes. It's not a graded stakes, but this is a graded stakes field. You've got a lot of horses dropping out of graded stakes, and it's strangely enough not the morning line favorite, but the second choice in Heart to Heart is a multiple graded stakes winner. I gotta wonder why he ends up here, and if this is just a little bit of a stopover before going down to the winter in South Florida, because. I looked. Brian Lynch has never won, ever, a turf race at Aqueduct. He's only run 12 times, 0 for 12 with just 1 second. So this is not a normal thing he does. When the calendar turns to November and they move to Aqueduct, Lynch is generally not running those kinds of races. So it was odd to see him end up here in a listed stake. I got a feeling this is a prep for something else. He's going to get a lot of other early pace pressure. So I'm kind of against him at a short price. I think Jay Gatsby probably gets a very good trip, but I think he's the other much more likely contender. So I think another one who will probably box an exacta with Jay Gatsby and Night Prowler for Chad Brown, who is only making his third start as a 4-year-old, came off a really long layoff, and I think is kind of back into his best form that we saw as a 3-year-old. I think he could be a big player. I think he could move forward, and I think he'll get a very good trip in this one at maybe a nice price for a Chad Brown runner.
JK, how do you see the Artie Schiller?
This is a tough race. This is one of those races if someone picks one horse, and I'm not talking about Mike, I'm just saying in general. If someone picks one horse, and they're confident that horse is going to win, it's the kind of horse, the kind of guy I would just argue with him just to make him, because eventually you would wear him out. So he likes Jay Gatsby, so you don't like long on value, and then try to make him defend himself, and then you'll eventually talk circles around him enough that he'll have to give in that his one horse opinion's wrong. Whoever gets the best trip in this race is going to win. And there's no distinct pace scenario that can identify what's going to happen. I mean, you got to think
there's a lot of speed. I thought Mike was right.
I think there's speed.
I thought there's tons of speed.
Well, here's the thing: is Macagon's going to go, right? Or whatever, however the hell you say it.
Macagon, I say. I'm not sure if it's right, but yeah, he'll go. Heart to Heart will go. And King Crease's best races. Are
right
on
long on value too. I mean, you look at his route races. He's on or near the lead. I mean, he's stretching out from a sprint. I think he'll be forwardly placed.
Right, but here's the thing. I don't see it falling apart. I mean, if you look at who's going to ride Heart to Heart, Arad, he's going to sit on the outside of Macagone. I don't think Long on Value necessarily has to go to the front. I just don't think it's going to be that fast. I think that they're going to be forward. There's, I mean, it'll be honest, but I don't think it'll be that fast. I ended up with Jay Gatsby and Black Type. I'm picking two. Jay Gatsby off of the last race where I thought Heart to Heart had an easy lead. I have a note that Jay Gatsby doesn't like the soft turf. Not sure if the turf is going to still be soft by Saturday. I know they had a couple of races off this week. I agree with Mike. I think he's going to get a good trip. He should get a fair enough pace to run into. He can be close enough that it doesn't have to collapse for him to win. And then Black Type, I just feel like Black Type's last race was similar to that of Jay Gatsby. He was bumped at the start and was kind of closing into a slow pace. And in turf races, I think if you can find and identify a slow pace race with horses coming from off of it, I feel like that's one of the most dangerous angles in turf racing in America.
For sure.
And it's one that doesn't always result in a win, but it results in 7, 8, 9, 10 to 1 shots, getting involved in exactas and tries, and then on the occasional time getting up to win. So Black Type is one that I would definitely use off of that one. Jay Gatsby's going to be bet, but one that I wouldn't let beat me for sure.
One thing I wanted to follow up with you about, you said you had a note that Jay Gatsby did not like the yielding turf last time, JK?
I did have that note, yeah.
I'm assuming that related to his action or something. Obviously ran very well against the flow and posted a career best Beyer speed figure, but that doesn't mean that you're not right. I'm just curious if there was something specific that you saw.
Yeah, the note says hates soft turf.
Well, could that be because of his previous efforts? All of his worst efforts here in North America have come on softer turf or less than firm.
Before the last.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and if that's the case, if he was against the surface, against the flow, he's a very likely winner of this race.
Well, I think it'll be soft though, won't it? I mean, just New York. I mean, it's been off turf the last couple of days. I don't think it's going to rain between now and then. I guess we'll have to pay attention to the course condition to really answer that.
Did anyone else know that he's a half to Warfront? I just saw that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, he's a well-bred horse. One thing, if it is soft, check out Carafa. This is a horse who has never been out of the money on less than firm turf. 5 of his 12, or 5 for 12 on soft turf. This is at a price. If there's some cut in the ground, I'd be absolutely using Carafa to get in the money.
I'd be using Carafa if there wasn't cut in the ground. I think that horse is very live, and even more live if there is cut.
I don't know if you guys heard because she went upstairs, but Muggs the Labrador barking vociferously her endorsement of Carafa as well. So
that's just she's a Saratoga dog.
She is. She likes those New York breds.
I was going to try to maybe make a case for Flash Phelps to get a little bit of a piece in here. Another I wasn't sure about the turf condition for, but was just looking at a horse who could maybe run on late to get a piece. Either you guys have any opinion on that runner?
Well, no, but I'm just wondering if he's going to go here, if he's going to go at the race at Laurel, because he's cross-entered. So I hadn't heard a final word. I guess we could check.
If I owned Hillwood Stable LLC, I would get my tail south and get out of this field.
You just think it's too salty and possible issues with the turf. I was just, and maybe knowing that is why the morning line got hung up so high. I was just seeing that 20-1 and looking at the form and looking at what I thought was a more of a speed pace setup than I think Jonathon did, and thinking, hey, can we get a third or fourth situation here at 15-20-1? But I mean, the Gatsby thing. Very interesting. I mean, this race, I feel like it's like all our old friends. I feel like half this field has been picked by one of us or the other one of us in the couple of years of the DRF Players podcast and won. So lots of old friends here. I was looking for, the best closers, which to me, the obvious ones were the two that Jonathon mentioned, Gatsby and Black Type. Let's move on to a race that probably won't take all that long to talk about. We do have about 15, we've got like 12 minutes left to do these 3 races, so I don't mind burning through this one. JK, tell us the story of your future bet on Mastery.
Me and my buddy Jake Ballas were hanging out in the green room, or actually we were just in Kentucky in Lexington, and I guess he was friends with, I think it was Gatewood Bell. He's friends with Gatewood, and Gatewood said that Baffert texted him and said, like, hey, this mastery horse is pretty good. And Gatewood was like, oh, great. And Baffert said, hey, when I say one's good, So we had talked, Jake told me about the horse. So I put him in my stable so when he showed up, I could single a 1-9 shot or whatever. And then when he was debuting, we happened to be together in the green room and at Keeneland. And I said, it was like 45 minutes to post. I said, Jake, let's bet this. Let's see what we can get, what kind of number we can get on this future before he even breaks his maiden. And so we called our good buddy out in Las Vegas, and we got 100-1. So Jake and I split it. We bet 250 at 100-1, and the horse pops from the gate, wins. Now he's in a stake, blinkers off. He'll win again, and we'll be sitting on. I'll be sitting on half of this ticket for with Mastery, and then the not this time ticket that was validated by that performance in the Breeders' Cup. So exciting.
I don't care who
I don't become addicted to this.
I don't care who you mention. You could say Dale Romans, you could say Bob Baffert. I say nobody has a stronger hand heading into the 2017 Kentucky Derby than Jonathon Kinchen. Mike Hogan, what do you think of this race?
Well, I guess if you liked California Diamond, you'll finally get a little bit of a price on him because he won't be the favorite for first time in a while. But I think it's Mastery's race to lose. I don't see any reason why he doesn't go forward off of this. The blinkers off, I actually tweeted it out. Blinkers off following a win. This is something Baffert actually has done. This is a negative for most trainers. Baffert's done this in the past with some of his horses, and these are often his best horses. I mean, Secret Circle, Dortmund. He doesn't do this with any of them. He's doing this to get the horse to relax, to get the horse to go a little bit further, and a horse that he knows is going to show some natural speed even without the blinkers. I'd be surprised if he loses, but he'll probably be 1-5 again.
Certainly will be 1-5. And thank you, Mike, because I'll be plagiarizing that excellent point about Baffert and the blinkers off in my guest appearance on DRF Live tomorrow with Dan Illman. I'll give you a shout out, though. I'll give you a shout out for that.
Thank you.
My only idea here was maybe to try to play California Diamond out of the exacta in the theory that maybe he goes and tries to win the race and blows up in the process around the turn, and you can get one of the other three to slot in behind in the exacta. But we don't need to spend any more time on that. Let's zip ahead let's go to the Delta Downs Jackpot. How about that? Mike, we'll start with you once again.
This is an interesting race. I think this is a much more interesting 2-year-old race. And forgive me a second while I switch browser windows and pull it up. But the ones that I was interested in are not really the favorites. And I'm curious how this race is going to get bet. I like 2 8-1 morning line horses. Probably the one that I like a little better, partly because I think he's going to be higher than 8-1. He's number 3, Thirst for Life, Mark Casse runner. They debuted him in a stakes race, and he actually ran third. I mean, he wasn't a huge price in there. He was 5-2, so they expected him to run well, but he dwelt at the start, completely missed the break and ran well, then broke his maiden neck start in a pretty decent little field. Granted, he was 1-10. Comes back in a couple stakes races, moved a little too early, his first time going long in the Iroquois, when not this time, blew his doors off. And then ran a very good race at Keeneland, I thought, where he dueled early, put away the horse he was dueling with, looked beat on the rail in the stretch, and then rebroke to win a race that came back relatively live with the second-place finisher winning next out and third-place finisher running second. They both improved their buyer figures quite a bit off that race. I wouldn't be surprised if the 69 that he got for that is maybe a touch low. He's maybe more like 74, 75, which puts him in the mix here at a nice price. And he is a half-brother to Cavorting, so I don't see any reason why he shouldn't continue to improve as he gets older. So I really like him quite a bit. One off the pace that I'm curious about is number 9, J-Boy's Echo, the other Dale Romans 2-year-old, who's looked impressive in both of his starts and kind of got clobbered in his last, but still won impressively. Those would be the 2 I'd lean heavily on and hope for a nice price.
JK, your thoughts?
Oh, I couldn't find. I was trying to find the alarm sound on my phone, and I was going to hold it up to the mic like the head-to-head alert, head-to-head alert. I'm taking the other. I'm taking the other Cassie, our Stormin' Norman.
Okay.
Who was named after it's the name game here. It's really not.
Yeah.
It's a performance game. But
how'd that work out with Conquest Big E, huh?
Hey, well, yeah, not great, not great. No, I just the last race that our Stormin' Norman ran was huge. At Keeneland, stretching out now. I got a huge number. I'm not sure what his buyer. What was his buyer?
88.
Yeah, bigger. I've seen bigger
towers over this field though.
And off of that, with some really positive workout stuff moving forward, there's no way we're getting 8-1. But that's the one I want. And in fact, this is kind of a classic Empire scenario that we talked about before at Keeneland, where while others are reaching for, options that present value, I'm going to take the horse that makes the most sense to me, save money on trying. Because if it's not him, I don't know who it's going to be. I guess the 7-horse Ballandine or Bellandin makes sense, but if I participate in that situation, it's going to be all our Stormin' Norman for me, and I'm going to hope that buyer figure is real, stands up, and if it does, then it shouldn't really be a contest.
I was in the paddock for that race of our Stormin' Normans, and impressive looking individual who also looked to my untrained eye like longer would be better. You never did explain the name game situation. Named after Norman Cassie, of course, who's not only Mark's son, but this is the Norman who was the veteran who was the father.
The father.
Yes.
Yes, grandfather. Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
So Norm's grandfather, Mark's father. Exactly.
Absolutely.
And so we'll get that in there. I was 100% sure that's who Mike Hogan was going to be going with when he talked about an 8-1 shot that he liked. I also thought, just in terms of looking at the pace of Thirst for Life's last race and our Stormin' Normans, that our Stormin' Norman ran the race I was looking to bet going forward. One other horse I just wanted to mention, maybe more for underneath, but I'd probably use for a penny on top as well, is J-Boy's Echo for Dale Romans, who won pretty impressively also at Keeneland last time with a little bit of a trip. And just shaped like an improving horse, should be finishing, should be running late. And I do think this is a race where there are a few pace players that could set up for that kind of style. So that's another one I wanted to mention.
Quick question on him. Ridden both of his starts by Robbie Alvarado. Robbie Alvarado, for whatever reason, chooses to ride number 1, Pat on the Back, a horse he's never ridden before. Does that worry you? Do we take anything from that, or do we just say, let's not worry about it? He's got Kent, and Kent won this race last year on Exaggerator, and move forward.
That one-turn horse who won this 2-turn race last year, Graded Stake.
That's right.
That's right. It doesn't bother me. There's a million reasons why that stuff happens, Mike, as you know. In terms of giving calls to certain horses, and then trainers not letting jockeys out of calls and things like that. It just if I know it was a firing, or if I know a jockey made a choice, that's one thing. But it seems pretty clear that Robbie Alvarado doesn't think that Pat on the Back's chance in this race is greater than J-Boy's Echo. And if he does, good luck to him, and I'll lose a little bit of money finding out. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he did pick, but it didn't factor into my handicapping the race.
Feels like one of those scenarios which I've noticed in racing is where it's behind the scenes and you'll never understand or never know, is that J-Boy's Echo was probably pointing for someone else, and Dale wouldn't give Robbie like the, hey, we're definitely going to run here. So Robbie said, okay, well, I'm going to take the McPeak mount then. Dale said, okay. They decided to run the horse here. Now Robbie's not going to spin McPeak. Yeah. In fact, it's funny that you bring this up, talking about not this time. When I sat next to Dale Romans in the Saratoga airport, the Albany airport, coming from Saratoga, Robbie is the one who called him and told him, I haven't sat on a horse like this since some really good ones. And Dale hung up and said, that was my best friend, one of my best friends, Robbie, and he's the one who told me. And that's when I said, I got to go to the bathroom, and I called my guy in Vegas to make it. So I think they have a good relationship in terms of this is probably not anything to be concerned about.
He's not. So what you're saying is he's not worried about keeping J-Boy's Echo as his mount going forward on the Triple Crown Trail, because he's already got a different Romans mount.
Well, there's that.
I would assume that.
Yeah, I don't think that's what he was saying, but I think that's another inference you can make from that statement.
Right.
All right.
Well, I'm
just got a couple minutes left. I want to talk. We are going to give slightly short shrift to the DeFrancis Dash, but I don't want to make a joke out of it. So, JK, who did you come up with here?
A good friend of mine, Jack Jenkins, has been following Laurel a lot lately, and he continuously sends me Snapchats of how powerful it is to be on the outside there, and on figures, on class, on everything. Stall walking dude for fun. XY Jet comes back to the field. Stall walking dude for fun.
Stall walking dude is my pick in here as well. I like his closing kick. I like the fact that he'll be in position. I was going to ask you though, JK, about XY Jet. You've suggested certain emojis as a reason why Jorge Navarro's horses don't run so well in New York. I was thinking maybe you'd excuse that effort and see him as a possible loose leader here. Just give me your one sentence on XY Jet before we give Mike the mic.
He's gonna have to prove it to me with this horse. If the race was in Monmouth or in Florida, I think the horse would win for fun, but not. He's got to show it to me in Maryland with this type of horse.
Gotcha. So you see, because it's not his playground, not his sandbox, the way that those other tracks are, he still has to prove it to you, even though we're not talking about New York.
Right, and the horse had an excuse last time. I mean, they flew, and he was off of a really long break, but he was also kind of bad. I expected him to run better than that, and so it's going to take a little bit more proof for me. Bet the horse when he gets back down to Gulfstream.
Mike Hogan, who's going to win the Francis?
Well, see, I think Stall Walking Dude is the best horse, and the race sets up well for him. But this is a bet this horse when he gets back to New York situation, isn't it? I mean, at a short price, David Jacobson, 2 for 30 in graded stakes outside of New York in the last 5 years. The 2 wins were both in the Iselin at Monmouth. He often runs a lot of these horses. Salutos Amigos, Stall Walking Dude himself, who ran 5th at 7-5 last year in the Mr. Prospector at Gulfstream. I mean, a lot of these horses often get overbet and they don't run all that well. If for whatever reason this is just noise, he's probably the best horse and he might win this race for fun because the race will set up for him. I agree XY Jet probably comes back to the field. There's other speed. I just want to take a stab against him at a short price. The one I like, and I think he might get a little overlooked as the third choice, is Ivana Falanavalot. This is a horse who's unbeaten in how many races, if you forgive the Breeders' Cup Sprint last year when he ran into Run Happy and the best in the division. He's been working up a storm. I mean, 33-4 work last out at Remington Park. I think he's another that gets a good trip, maybe gets first jump on Stall Walking Dude, and maybe Calvin Burrell decides to listen to Jack Jenkins and take him outside and doesn't get swallowed up on the rail.
Certainly a rider who does understand bias, Calvin Burrell. All right, that is all the time that we have for today's show. We will be back on Tuesday with a recap of the weekend's action, and be a great show for questions on Tuesday. So we can still do Breeders' Cup follow-up if folks want to hit us up with any specific questions about the BC. Feel free to do that. You can find me on Twitter at LoomsBoldly. You can hit Jonathan up at UTBigHair. We gave Mike's handles before. You can also email us at podcast@drf.com. Happy to answer your questions as we go along the business of following racing in the wintertime. I want to thank JK. I want to thank Mike Hogan. I want to thank all of you for listening, especially those of you listening live on Spreaker. That's a fun option. Folks should definitely check out if you have the availability. We will be back on Tuesday. Hope you're all playing this I hope you're all playing this weekend, and may you win all your photos. 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 Photos.